Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 11th of December 2016. My name is TotalBiscuit, answering a few questions that have been sent in and submitted in various different ways, or I just found lying around on the internet. The game in the background is Star Wars Empire at War with the Thrawn's Revenge mod, which is a lot of fun to play, but it does seem to hard lock my machine on Windows 10 when I try to quit it, which is not exactly great. The first question coming in right here, something very recent. What do you think of the new 7.0 update to Dota 2? It would appear that significant elements of the game have been changed and not everybody is happy about it. Well, it's certainly not a surprise that quite a few people are unhappy about some of the changes made, and there's a few reasons for that, and obviously, since the update isn't out yet and people haven't played it, everything that's said about it is going to be something of a prejudgment. It's okay to express your opinion on that basis, but of course it's always good to wait for the thing to be available to play before you make any hard judgments on it. But I've noticed some interesting parallels with some of the reaction, and I don't want to group everybody into one box by any stretch. There's a lot of different reactions to this, but there's quite a bit of criticism of the update that I've noticed on a few forums and of course their subreddit as regards to the idea that it's making the game a bit more casual. This is a really common criticism that pops up for a bunch of different games. I've seen it an awful lot in the StarCraft 2 community, and it can in some cases be, what's the best word to use? Is aggressive a good word? I mean, it kind of is, but it's got some pretty bad associations with it. It can be potentially misguided. Let's go with that. You know, that's a decent enough word. Dota is a really hard game, as is StarCraft, as is League of Legends, as is Counter-Strike Go, as are a bunch of different competitive titles. Even things like Overwatch, which seem very easy to get into, at the high level are still inherently very, very hard games. And there is a difference between the idea of the skill ceiling and the skill floor. Now, some of the things that I disagree with when people get all up in knots about changes to StarCraft 2 that they potentially see as making the game easier are focused on the misunderstanding of the skill floor and mistaking skill floor for skill ceiling. There are some games that have a very high skill floor but also a high skill ceiling, and there are some games that have a very low skill floor. That means it's easier to get started and play it to at least a basically functional level. Games that have high skill floors, like say StarCraft 2, can be quite difficult to even get your foot in the door in. If you play StarCraft 2, you know that macroing correctly and even getting to the level where you can even build enough units at the right time is really difficult. And as a result of that, there are several leagues within the matchmaking system of StarCraft 2 that are defined almost purely by your ability to spend enough money. So a player used to play the game called Destiny, and he demonstrated that it was possible to reach the Master League, which is the second off top league in StarCraft 2. Only Grandmaster is higher, and Grandmaster can only contain 200 people at any given time. So it's basically where the pro gamers play. Master is one below that, and people there are still bloody good. You can reach Master League by building only a single type of unit, and that unit was the Queen. And back then, the Queen was not considered all that great. It's been made an awful lot better since then, but it's still, relatively speaking, quite a weak unit, by necessity for balance. But he proved he'd get all the way to Master League, all the way from the bottom, just building this one unit. And how could he do that? Because that game has a high skill floor, and even getting anywhere really requires something of a mastery of macro. And that makes the game very, very difficult on a low level. Very low level, because you've got to do so much, and there's such a potential to make mistakes. StarCraft 2, maybe more than any other game in the multiplayer competitive scene, has potential to make stupid mistakes, and it's often by misclicking, by problems with the interface, by just making the wrong decision, and many of those mistakes are effectively invisible if you are watching the game, say, as a third party, but as a player, they can cost you the match. I'm talking about things like misrallying workers. I'm talking about missing a building on the minimap or missing an incoming harassment unit that just wipes your mineral line out in a couple of seconds and all that sort of thing. All of these things and the speed that you need to even feel like you're playing the game remotely properly contributes to a high skill floor. Now, I don't think that high skill floor is generally a good thing. I don't think it benefits anybody. It doesn't usually make the game more impressive to watch. Some people can appreciate that this player has become a pro in a game that's very, very hard, and that's worthy of some admiration. But I think there is an equal amount of appreciation for pros in games that have low skill floors. And Dota 2 has a low skill floor in comparison to something like StarCraft 2. It has a higher skill floor than something like League of Legends, and it certainly has a higher skill floor than, say, a mobile game like Clash Royale, even though they effectively accomplish similar things. You might be getting up in arms that I just compared Dota 2 to Clash Royale, but the reality of it is that Clash Royale, which is a very simple mobile game, has both a high skill ceiling, can be played at a very competitive level, and there's quite a lot going on there, but a very, very low skill floor. It's very accessible, and it's actually enjoyed by a lot of competitive players. A lot of the guys that I hang around with at tournaments, either pro gamers or commentators or hosts or analysts, actually play Clash Royale. What do you think we do in breaks? There's entire clans of them. You're seeing ex-world champions that are playing this game on the side because they see the competitive potential of it, but it's really easy to get into. And I think that most games benefit from being easy to get into. Now, when you talk about something like Dota 2, it can be quite intimidating to get into. And I think that lowering the skill floor is generally a good thing. And sometimes that means changing things that are aspects of the game which require skill, but functionally they're not creating what I would call enjoyable skill. That's very subjective. It's a bit of a clunky statement, but let me explain what I mean by it. Being able to inject lava in StarCraft 2 at the right time is a skill. And it is going to, as part of the overall economic management aspect of the game, that being macro, it is going to greatly affect your success. All pro gamers are very good at this aspect, and yet it is an aspect of the game that nobody really cares about in a competitive environment. Nobody cares about whether or not these pro players are hitting their injects all the time, because you can assume that they will be. But that's a big difference between a pro gamer and a non-pro gamer, and yet it's not a decision most of the time. A lot of these things are not decisions, whether or not you build SCVs continuously, or whether you forget to. That's not really an enjoyable decision that the player makes at a high level. It's just a thing you have to do. It's maintenance. It's brushing your teeth, for the most part. And I think that there are aspects of Dota 2 that are unenjoyable skill elements, and you can remove those in order to lower the skill floor, but you can keep the skill ceiling relatively intact. Now, when it comes to this patch, there are a couple of aspects that you could argue are doing that, but in many cases, the hostility to it seems to actually be not that it is actively lowering the skill floor and taking aspects of the game out that require skill. It's actually because they're taking aspects of other games that are perceived as having a lower skill floor and skill ceiling and emulating them. And that feels like to some people that they're ruining the hardcore nature of the game. A big example of this particular attitude is when you see some of the responses to the addition of talents to the game. In 7.0, at certain levels, you're going to be able to pick between a couple of mutually exclusive talents that enhance your hero. This is going to allow your hero to scale in ways that weren't really available before. And in doing so, they also removed the choice to pick, instead of a level of a skill or your ultimate, bonus stats. Bonus stats has been an element of Dota for ages. All the way back to Dota All-Stars. Hell, probably even before Dota All-Stars, but I don't go back that far. I played Dota All-Stars and Warcraft 2, but before that, of course, there was a name for it that didn't involve that. Anyway, included in that was the idea that instead of getting that upgrade for your skill, you could grab bonus stats, which was usually like +2 to strength, intelligence, and whatever the hell the other number is. It is agility? It's probably agility. In favor of removing that, they put this talent system in, and some people are like, oh god, it's too much like Heroes of the Storm now. And yeah, Heroes of the Storm is an easier game. I don't think anyone's going to doubt that. It's probably got a lower skill ceiling than Dota 2, and it's definitely got a much, much lower skill floor. That's potentially a benefit, and it's one of the reasons why I like playing it, but I've also put quite a lot of time to Dota 2, and thankfully, since I've learned at least the basics of it, the skill floor's not so relevant to me anymore. But there are some people that are very concerned that the game is becoming too easy, that it's being made casual, because they have taken an aspect from a game which is more casual. Now, what I would encourage people to do in this situation, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. It might very well end up that this choice was, frankly, a silly one and it doesn't work out. We don't know yet. We haven't played it. But it's worth noting that many games become exceptional by taking ideas from other places. I mean, hell, Blizzard is built entirely on the back of that. And Dota 2 came from a mod, which not only took ideas from other custom maps in Warcraft 3, but Dota 2 specifically took ideas from mods and other games to create what is an excellent competitive game in its own right. And the evolution of this game is important, not so much to keeping it relevant, but keeping it fresh, keeping people playing, keeping people interested. If you look at the way the mobile market works, and you're probably going to turn around and go at me for saying that, alright, cool, hear me out. If you look at the way that market works, the vast majority of continually successful games, most of them being free to play, stay popular by making updates to the game, by keeping the game fresh. And not only does that keep the game fresh, but large updates to the game can bring back lapsed players. There is a much larger base of people that don't play the game anymore versus people that do. StarCraft 2 needs to do things to bring back lapsed players, and it has tried, to its credit. And making these big updates, which all of the big numbered updates rather than the decimal updates are for Dota 2, will get people interested again. An anecdotal example, I just reinstalled the game because I'm very interested to see what happens with that. And particularly that talent system, to me, sounds like a way more enjoyable choice than just picking stats, because that all got figured out. There was an optimal way to build your character, and there was a suboptimal way to build it. And there wasn't really any choice involved there. And even when there was a choice, the choice, to me anyway, was a dull one. If I'm going to make a choice, I want to make a choice that's going to make a big difference, not a nominal difference. And I want one that's very visible, which plus stats really are not. I want the ability to do something different or really enhance one of my existing abilities rather than do so under the hood. There's a big difference to upgrading your character in a way that is highly visual and highly visible and obvious to both you and your opponents versus upgrading it in a very under-the-hood way. And most of that is down to upgrading basic stats. There's a lot of games that fall into this category. I criticize Shadow Warrior 2, which is a totally different genre of game, for doing too much under-the-hood plus stat tweaking stuff. I want loot in games to give me a big change in the way that the game is played. I want to feel significantly more powerful or significantly different in my capabilities. I think that adding talents to a game like Dota 2 does that, whereas having that plus stats option does not. And you could argue that some things are kept in the game solely because they were in the original version, not because they were necessarily a good idea. There's a valid argument to say that because they've been there for so long, a lot of people have found really cool ways to use those mechanics that make the game kind of unique. They make it distinctive, they make it stand out. But let me say this, quite a few of the things that are valued in games like both Dota 2 and StarCraft, while they're valued by long-term players, are not valued by new players. Maybe they're even things that would put them off. And yeah, of course, you should value the opinions of players that have been sticking around for years. That's your loyal player base. But I do tend to find that the loyal player base is far more likely to stick around through changes and through hardship and through bad times than the fair weather player bases, the more casual player base. You might say, well, screw the casual player base then. You gotta be careful with that attitude. That's something that has killed games before. By saying screw the casual player base and say we're only going to stick to catering to the hardcore loyalists, you see a shrinking sea. Dota 2 is at no risk of going away anytime soon. But I think that some of these mechanics are not so much outdated, but they're archaic. They're things that were based in the root of the fact that it was a mod. And that plus stats option is probably one of them. And I think that the plus talents option is a hell of a lot more of an interesting choice. And there's a few other things in there that certainly make me believe that this might make a more interesting game for people, and it may very well reactivate lapsed players. This is gonna run on a little bit longer than this piece of Star Wars footage, so let's appropriately switch over to Heroes of the Storm. That should suit what we're talking about there. Now, if you recall earlier, I was talking about this notion that there are some hardcore StarCraft 2 players that are very hostile to changes like this. We saw this when they implemented for a while auto-cast on queens, which means that queens, instead of having to be manually selected in order to inject lava, which is a critical part of playing Zerg, like, you cannot win without doing that. It's not a decision that often comes up, that's often relevant. If you've got a very low amount of energy, say at the start of the game, you may choose to inject, or maybe you go for a really early creep tumor because you want to start spreading that. But for the most part, it's not a decision people have to make at certain stages of the game, and frankly, I don't think it's a very interesting gameplay decision. So I was in favor of this automatic injection because it lowered the skill floor. It may have slightly lowered the skill ceiling as well, and I think there were certainly some valid arguments from people that it meant that you didn't have as much to do as Zerg, and that there could be parts of the game that were a little bit slower, and you didn't really get to do much, and you felt like you were just sitting around. Sure, but I think there are other ways to fix that, and you can also free up time that is spent doing what are basically menial caretaker tasks, and allow people to use that time to do something more fun, like go harass, go send a little group over to skirmish somewhere, engage in the more enjoyable mechanics of the game that I think are the core mechanics of the game, the things that make the game great. I don't think that stuff like manual queen injection, manual building of workers in StarCraft 2, manual creep spread, I don't think those are the things that make the game great, although on some level they can certainly be appreciated. I think that you can argue that changing that is a worthwhile sacrifice. You sacrifice something that's arguably quite small, it doesn't really affect the skill ceiling that much, but in doing that, you make a big difference to the skill floor, and there's all sorts of benefits to that. For instance, if you have a low skill floor and you don't make such a massive void between two people when it comes to their level of skill, that means that friends can play with each other without it being a complete and total stomp. The comparison I'd like to make, again, I come back to StarCraft 2 because it's the thing I'm most familiar with, so I can make easier examples with it. The example that I like to make is fighting games versus StarCraft 2. You play a fighting game with a friend, you don't know what you're doing, the friend goes to Evo and does well. You can button bash in a fighting game. You might get a few hits in. You'll lose. You're gonna lose. But you got a few hits in. Maybe you accidentally pulled off a dragon punch. Maybe you even hit him with it. Doesn't that feel great? Doesn't that feel good? You don't mind so much that you got your ass kicked, because at least you felt like you had a fighting chance. StarCraft 2 rarely feels that way. When there's a big gap between player skill, you have lost before you even go in the door, and you've lost in such a crushing, one-sided way that it's difficult to enjoy yourself in the process. I think that's one of the main reasons why Heroes of the Storm sort of went the way that it did. Yeah, lower skill ceiling, but again, much lower skill floor. It's much easier to jump into Heroes of the Storm and play with some friends. You're probably gonna suck, but you're not gonna be completely terrible. You can be a genuine liability to the team in Dota 2 if you do that. Less so in a game like Heroes of the Storm. Doesn't mean you should make Dota 2 like Heroes of the Storm in that respect. The fact that you are a liability to the team, the fact that dying has a big impact on the game is one of the key defining aspects of Dota 2. But that's the real difference between something like that and plus stats. I don't think plus stats is a key defining, enjoyable aspect of Dota 2. I don't think that is what makes the game truly unique and special. So I have no problem with them making a change to it. And freshening up the game has its benefits. It's why the mobile market does it as much as it does. Keeps people active, and of course, it puts the game back in the spotlight. You can bring new players in. This is a way to say to some of the guys that are playing Heroes of the Storm, you feel like you want to play something harder than this now? You feel like you've graduated from that? Well, we've got some similar mechanics in here that you'll feel immediately familiar with, but we've got an awful lot more than that. We've got a lot more in store for you to learn, and hopefully you're going to enjoy that aspect of it. I've focused quite a lot on that specific change because it's one of the most divisive, so I think it's worthy of the most discussion. But there's certainly a few other things. They've made some changes to the HUD. They felt that they could do it better. And really, think about it, Dota 2 was an attempt to do it better versus the original. The original Dota was restricted, very much so, by what the Warcraft 3 game could do, what that engine could do. There's only so much you can really do to change that. But if you build it from the ground up in a brand new engine, there's an awful lot more you can do there. And some people are going to argue, and already have, that changing this HUD, making things a little bit easier to see, has made the game more casual. Sure, it's lowered the skill floor just that little bit. But did it do it in any meaningful way? Did it do it in any way that truly harmed the game? Not in my opinion. To make a truly great omelet, you do have to break the occasional egg, and I don't necessarily think that that is a bad thing. But it can be. There's no doubt about it, but it can be. Does something like one-click level up ruin the game? No. Does it make the game slightly less difficult to play? Yes. Does that remove an aspect of skill from the game? Yes. Is it a significant or enjoyable aspect of skill? Hell no. Not in my opinion. Absolutely not. So I'm glad to see that. But of course, a lot of it is going to come down to how well it plays, and we will know once the update goes live. And I'm really looking forward to trying it out. Some new gameplay aspects, some new changes. They keep a game like this feeling vital. They keep it feeling up to date. They make it feel alive. And of course, they bring people like me back. I guess some of you didn't want that. Yeah, I understand. But I think that this is looking like a very interesting set of changes indeed. Alright folks, that wraps me up for the day. Thank you very much for watching the Mailbox. If you enjoyed the video, by all means do feel free to click the like button. If not, dislike button is right over there. And I'll see you next time.